Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video and commenting where you're watching from. Now, let's dive into these chilling stories. I've been going through a lot recently. You know the type of stuff. Life feels like it's spiraling and nothing seems in your control anymore. Maybe it's the constant rush of work, people needing things from me all the time, or just the relentless noise of city life. So when I found myself staring at a picture-perfect winter scene, snow-capped mountains, towering evergreens, the kind of peaceful quiet that only nature can provide, I thought a solo hiking trip would be the perfect reset, a chance to clear my head, find some peace. I'm not a professional hiker, but I've done some research. I'd walked the trails around the Sierra Nevada before, so I was no stranger to these mountains. It wasn't the first time I'd been out alone. I loved the isolation, the silence, the absence of anything but my own thoughts. It was cathartic. So when I read about a particularly scenic trail, one that was still open despite the recent snowstorm, I decided to give it a shot. How hard could it be? There'd been a lot of news recently about hikers going missing in the area. I know, people tend to go missing in the mountains every year. It happens, but I wasn't worried. Sure, there were warnings, and they were kind of heavy-handed. Locals urging tourists to stay off the trail, saying it was too dangerous, especially after the snowstorm. But I didn't think much of it. I'd done this before. So I packed my gear, grabbed a few snacks, and hit the road before dawn. I wanted to make it to the summit before the sun went down, and I figured getting an early start was my best shot. By the time I pulled up to the trailhead, I noticed something odd. The parking lot was mostly empty, no one in sight. There were maybe 2 or 3 scattered around, but not the usual crowd of hikers. A strange chill crept over me, the kind that makes you question your decision, but I brushed it off. It's early. It's winter. Most sane people were probably still tucked in bed. I threw my bag over my shoulder and started down the trail, the crunch of my boots against the snow, the only sound breaking the silence. The air was cold, sharp, but invigorating. The trees on either side were dense, their trunks thick with years of standing through all kinds of weather. A dusting of snow covered every branch, making the whole forest look almost magical, peaceful. But the deeper I went into the woods, the more that peace felt empty. The world seemed too still. There was no chirping, no rustling in the bushes, no animals moving around. It was just me, the snow, and the trees. And as I walked, I couldn't shake this gnawing feeling that I wasn't as alone as I thought. It was like something, or someone, was out there, just out of sight, watching me from the darkness of the trees. I paused for a moment, letting the quiet soak in. My breath came out in little clouds in the crisp air. For a second, I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. But then I heard it, the crunch of footsteps. At first I thought it was the wind. The sound was too faint, too muffled. But then it came again, this time closer. It wasn't the wind. Someone was out there. I froze in place, heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps continued, steady, deliberate. Too close. My stomach dropped, and every muscle in my body tensed. I turned around, trying to act like I wasn't panicking. My eyes scanned the trees, but I saw nothing, just the empty snow-covered woods. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was nothing, just a trick of my imagination. Maybe it was just a deer or something moving quietly through the snow, but still I couldn't shake the feeling. I decided to keep moving. The trail was becoming steeper, and I needed to make progress before the sun began to set. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling, the sensation that something was out there, following me. A few hours later, the daylight had begun to fade. The temperature dropped with it, and I was starting to feel the chill in my bones. I pulled off the trail into a small clearing to rest for a while. It was quiet, too quiet, and the snow seemed to amplify every sound. I could hear my breath, my heart, the occasional rustle of the wind through the branches, but nothing else, nothing moving. No other hikers, no animals, just me. I dug through my bag for some snacks, pulled out my phone, and checked for a signal. Nothing. It didn't matter. I was too far into the woods for any kind of reception. And then I heard it again, that soft crunching sound. Only this time it was louder, closer. I froze. My eyes darted around the clearing. No way. My mind raced. It couldn't be an animal. It was too deliberate. I stood up, my heart racing. The steps were getting closer. I turned slowly, trying not to make any sudden moves, and that's when I saw him. He was standing just past the edge of the clearing, barely visible between the thick trees. At first, I thought it was just another hiker, but the more I looked at him, the more something didn't seem right. He wasn't moving. He was just standing there. His posture was rigid, almost unnatural. The figure was tall, dressed in a heavy jacket that looked far too worn, too big for him. He had a rough, weathered look, like he'd been out here for weeks, maybe months. His face was pale, gaunt, and his eyes were wide, unnervingly wide, like he hadn't blinked in days. The kind of eyes that you never forget once you've seen them. I couldn't bring myself to speak at first. My legs felt like lead, my throat tight. I should have said something, anything, but I couldn't. Then, as if he'd been waiting for me to react, he stepped forward, his boots crunching loudly in the snow as he closed the distance between us. I could feel my pulse quicken, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Lost? His voice was hoarse, almost strained, like he hadn't used it in a while. I took a step back. No, I wasn't lost. I knew the trail. I wasn't some clueless tourist. But the way he said it, the way he stood there, watching me with those unsettling eyes, I couldn't speak for a second. No, I finally managed, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm good, just resting. He didn't move, just kept staring at me. I can show you the way. It's dangerous out here, especially for someone like you, he said, his voice low now. My heart skipped. Something wasn't right. His tone wasn't friendly. It was too knowing, like he was waiting for me to do something, waiting for me to make a mistake. I forced myself to take a step back. No, thanks. I know the way. But he didn't step aside. Instead, he moved closer, too quickly. I stumbled back in surprise, and before I could react, he was almost right in front of me. He reached out, and his hand, cold and rough, grasped my wrist with surprising strength. The world seemed to stop. My mind went blank, and my pulse shot through the roof. I yanked my wrist, but his grip was like iron. "Let go!" I gasped, panic seizing me. His eyes narrowed slightly, and then his hand shifted. It felt like something cold brushed against my wrist. A knife? I couldn't even process it. All I could think was, run. I shoved him. Hard. Hard. With everything I had. He staggered back, but not far. His eyes, those terrible eyes, locked onto mine, and I could see the intent behind them. Without thinking, I grabbed a branch lying on the ground nearby. I swung it at him, hitting him in the shoulder. He grunted, but didn't flinch. The swing gave me just enough of a distraction to break free. I didn't stop to look back. I ran. The snow was deep, and the trail was winding. My boots kept slipping, but I pushed forward, feeling the burn in my lungs, the cold seeping through my clothes. I didn't dare look behind me. I ran until I reached the trailhead, the familiar sign barely visible in the fading light. My car was just ahead, and with everything in me, I sprinted toward it, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. I didn't look back until I was inside. The doors locked, my heart still hammering in my chest. I didn't stay there. I drove. Fast. I didn't care where. I just needed to get out of those woods. When I finally stopped, I didn't even know how long I'd been driving. My body was still on edge, my mind racing, replaying every detail of the encounter. The look in his eyes, the speed of his movement, the way he grabbed me. I never saw the man again. I never even heard anything about him after that. But I don't think I need to. The memory of his eyes, those wide, hollow eyes, haunts me. I haven't hiked alone since. I don't think I ever will again. It started off so normal. I was house sitting for my friend Kyle while he and his wife were away for a few days. They live in a pretty secluded area in the hills, just outside of town, where you can barely see the next house. It's quiet out there, peaceful even, and that was part of the reason I agreed to help them out with the dogs and keep an eye on the place while they were gone. I got to their house around 5:30 in the evening, right as the sun was starting to set. I'm not great with animals, but I figured it would be a chill few days, just me, the dogs, and the house. No big deal. After settling in, I let the dogs out into the backyard, which is huge and fenced off, and then I made myself dinner. Everything seemed fine, normal. The kind of quiet evening where you could hear the crickets starting to come out and the wind rustling through the trees. But after I ate, something happened that made my stomach drop. I noticed the motion sensing lights in the yard kept turning on and off even though there was no one out there. They're pretty bright, so they don't just flicker for no reason. The lights on the front porch would come on, then the ones on the side of the house, then the ones in the back, almost in a pattern, like something was walking past them. At first, I thought maybe it was the wind, or maybe an animal. There are raccoons and coyotes out here, but the lights don't usually go off and on that quickly with just an animal moving around. And anyway, the dogs were inside with me, so I figured they would have been barking if something was out there. But no barking. It kept happening, though. Every few minutes, one of those lights would flicker to life. I went outside to check the backyard, but the motion lights didn't come on when I stood out there. That's when I started to wonder if maybe something or someone was moving around at the edge of the yard, just outside the reach of the lights. I went back inside and locked the door, more out of habit than anything else. But the strange feeling was still there. I tried to shake it off. I turned on the TV, watched a few episodes of whatever I could find on Netflix, but I couldn't concentrate. The lights kept triggering in the backyard. It was like someone was pacing around out there. Around 9 p.m., the feeling was getting worse. I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid or if something was really going on, but I felt like I wasn't alone. It's hard to explain, but I just had this nagging sensation that someone or something was watching me. I decided to call Kyle just to distract myself. Maybe talk about something normal, remind myself that I was just overthinking it. He picked up on the second ring, sounding relaxed as usual. "Hey, man, how's everything going?" he asked. "It's fine," I said, forcing my voice to sound casual. "Just the dogs and me. You guys having fun?" "Yeah, it's been good," he replied. "We're just out for a hike. Everything okay at the house?" "Yeah, it's just the motion lights outside keep going off. I keep checking, but there's no one out there." He laughed. "Probably just a raccoon or something. Those things get weird with motion sensors. They're sneaky." "Yeah, maybe," I said, though I didn't really believe it. "I'll be fine. I'll check on the dogs again. Talk to you later." I hung up, feeling a little less tense, but not by much. The lights were still flickering, and by now I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I checked the doors again, locked them, double-checked the windows, and then I went into the living room to sit down. The dogs were lying on the floor, but they weren't acting normal. They weren't barking, but they were both looking towards the back door, their eyes wide and alert. I turned the TV off, then the lights. I wanted to listen. That's when I heard it. A soft tapping sound. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, like someone was tapping lightly on the window near the back door. I stood up and slowly crept over to it, trying to look through the blinds without being seen. Nothing. I sighed, feeling a mix of relief and embarrassment. It was just the wind, probably, or the house settling. I told myself that. But then I heard it again, louder this time. Tap, 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 like someone was lightly knocking on the glass. I froze. My heart started pounding in my chest. I pulled the blinds apart, but there was nothing there. Just the dark backyard with the motion lights still blinking on and off in the distance. It's hard to explain, but I felt like something was very wrong. That's when I saw it. In the darkness near the back fence, a shadow moved. It wasn't like a shadow cast by a tree or anything natural. It was too dark, like it was absorbing the light around it. And it moved in a way that didn't make sense. Slow, deliberate. A person? But why were they so still, so quiet? I didn't think. I just grabbed my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? I think someone's in my friend's backyard, I said, my voice shaky. I'm house sitting, and the motion lights keep turning on and off, and I just saw something move by the fence. I'm really freaked out. Stay on the line, sir. We'll send an officer to your location. I couldn't sit still. I paced around the living room, my hands clammy and heart racing. My mind was reeling. What was that thing in the backyard? Was it just a shadow, or was someone really out there? I waited and waited. Every second felt like an eternity. Then I saw it again. A figure moved past the living room window, right outside, like they were walking across the yard. I couldn't see their face, but their outline was clear against the lights in the distance. I could feel the fear crawling up my spine. I whispered into the phone, "There's someone out there. I just saw them move past the window." "Stay inside. Do not open the door," the dispatcher told me. "Help is on the way." I pulled the blinds down, stepped back, and turned off all the lights. My heart was pounding in my chest. I could feel the cold sweat on my forehead. A few minutes later, I saw the flash of red and blue lights outside. I breathed a sigh of relief. The police had arrived. The officers searched the property, and it wasn't long before they found someone hiding in the backyard, pressed up against the fence, just out of view from the house. The guy didn't try to run when the cops found him. He just stood there, frozen. They told me afterward that he'd been watching me for hours, waiting for me to go to bed. He was just waiting for the right moment to get in. Apparently, he'd been watching the house for a while, even before I started house sitting. That night, I felt a kind of fear I couldn't shake off, like something had marked me, and I knew I'd never be alone again. It's been a few years now, but I still think about that night sometimes. I still feel that knot in my stomach when I think about how close I came to something I can't even begin to explain. And it's one of those things that, even though it's over, still lingers. You know what I mean? That maybe you escape something, but you don't really know how or why or what it could have been. You just know you got lucky. It happened in the winter, of course. Even in California, the nights can get brutal. There's something about the cold in the desert air that cuts deeper than you'd expect. I wasn't used to it. I mean, I'm from Southern California, where even the winter doesn't really feel like winter. But that night was different. The air had this sharp, biting quality to it, like it could freeze you from the inside out. It wasn't snowing, but there was something about the atmosphere, the stillness, that made the cold feel worse than it was. I had been driving back from LA, heading south to my apartment in San Diego. I'd already been on the road for hours, the monotonous hum of the car and the constant flicker of streetlights making my eyelids heavy. I knew I couldn't push through the whole way. I was too tired. The last thing I needed was to nod off behind the wheel and end up on the side of the road, or worse. So I decided to pull over for a quick break, stretch my legs, maybe get some air. Just a few minutes to clear my head. I found a small pull-off area along a stretch of the 5 freeway. It was quiet, almost eerily so. No cars, no lights, just me and the road. It felt safe, but at the same time, The emptiness of it made me feel exposed. I got out of the car and leaned against the hood, staring out at the dark highway. It was the kind of place where you feel like the world could end and no one would know. The air was freezing, and the only sound was the distant rush of wind and the soft whir of my car's engine cooling down. I was about 5 minutes into just staring at the night when I saw the headlights. It was a van. I quickly got back into the car. At first it didn't register, but then the van slowed down. Way down. Too slow, and then it pulled up beside me and stopped. I could barely make out the shape of the van in the dim light, but it didn't seem out of the ordinary, just some guy passing through, maybe. That's what I told myself anyway. Then, the door opened. At first, I thought it was a woman, maybe someone who had pulled over for a break too. But when the figure stepped into the light, I saw it was a man. Late 30s, maybe 40s. His movements were jerky, almost too quick, like he had somewhere he needed to be. His clothes were ragged, oversized, like he had been wearing them for years. His face was pale, drawn, with dark circles under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in a while. He walked toward my car and knocked on the window. Not a polite knock, but a loud, sharp rap that made me flinch. My heart skipped a beat. I'm not going to lie, I felt that little spark of fear in my chest. Something wasn't right. But at the same time, I thought maybe I was overthinking it. People sometimes stop to help, right? I cracked the window a few inches, just enough to hear him. "Hey, you've got a flat tire," he said, his voice rough like he hadn't spoken to anyone in days. He was standing too close, his breath coming out in visible puffs in the cold night air. I glanced at the tires. The darkness made it hard to see anything clearly, but nothing seemed off. Still, I wasn't a mechanic. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I should just check. "Are you sure?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. He nodded, his eyes flicking nervously between me and my car. "Yeah, I was driving behind you for a while. I saw it. Flat tire." I hesitated for a second. Something about the way he said it, the way his eyes kept darting between me and the shadows around us, made me uneasy. But I pushed it down. Maybe I was just being paranoid. I told myself it would be fine. A quick check. That was all. So, like an idiot, I opened the door and stepped out. As soon as my foot hit the ground, the man moved, too fast. Before I even had a chance to fully register what was happening, his hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. The grip was hard. Way too hard. His fingers dug into my skin, cold and unrelenting. He yanked me toward him with an unexpected strength, and I stumbled forward, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" I shouted, panic spiking in my chest. I tried to pull away, but he didn't loosen his grip. His breath smelled sour, like stale cigarettes, and something else I couldn't place, something metallic. His eyes, those bloodshot, desperate eyes, locked onto mine. He wasn't saying anything, not a word, just pulling me toward the van parked off to the side, its door wide open, the interior swallowed by darkness. I don't know why, but I felt like I was being led to something far worse than just a flat tire. That's when the adrenaline hit me. I kicked him. Hard. Right in the stomach. I felt the sickening thud of my boot hitting flesh, and he grunted, stumbling back, his grip loosening just enough for me to break free. I didn't think. I just ran. I bolted toward my car, my legs moving faster than I thought possible. I slammed the door shut behind me, not bothering to look back. My heart was hammering in my chest, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I fumbled with the keys. I didn't even bother to check if he was coming after me. I just threw the car in gear and drove off. I didn't stop until I hit the next gas station, my breath coming in quick gasps. I could barely steady my hands long enough to pull out my phone and dial the police. When I told them what happened, they sounded skeptical at first. Who wouldn't? It just sounded so strange. But after I gave them the details, they promised to send someone out. They said they'd send someone, but I didn't know how long that would take, and I didn't feel safe waiting. Every minute felt like an eternity. Finally, the officers arrived, and by then, the man's van was gone. The police tracked it down a few hours later, hidden in the brush just off the highway. They arrested him that night. Apparently, he had a history, a disturbing one. Turns out he'd been pulling the same thing with other people, approaching them under the guise of help, only to try and drag them into his van. The police told me it was lucky I'd gotten away when I did. He had a long list of charges, but they'd only caught up with him after a few close calls. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't reacted so quickly. I don't know if he was armed or if he had planned something even worse. I'll never know. But I do know this. I'll never pull over for a stranger again. Not on a lonely stretch of highway, not anywhere. It's been years. And I still can't shake the image of his face from my mind. I still can't forget how cold it felt, how the air seemed to freeze up around us, like the world had stopped moving the second he grabbed my wrist. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever really understand why he did what he did. What was his endgame? Why did he target me? Or was I just the wrong person in the wrong place at the wrong time? All I know is this: I got lucky. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return.